You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. As the American Revolutionary War neared its 2-year mark, the British crafted a new strategy. They aimed to cut off New England by separating it from what they saw as the more loyal middle and southern colonies. In 1777, British leaders hatched a plan for a 3-pronged attack. Barry St. Leger would lead the western force, moving from Ontario through western New York along the Mohawk River. Meanwhile, another force would head up the Hudson River Valley from New York City. From the north, a third force would advance southward from Montreal. Their goal was to converge near Albany, New York, effectively isolating New England from the rest of the colonies. In June of 1777, British General John Burgoyne launched an operation, moving southward from Quebec with the goal of taking control of the upper Hudson River Valley. His success at Fort Ticonderoga soon turned sour as his campaign encountered numerous setbacks. By the end of July, some of his forces had made it to the upper Hudson, yet supply and logistical issues held up the main body of his army at Fort Edward. An effort to overcome these challenges ended badly, with nearly 1,000 men lost at the Battle of Bennington on August 16th. To complicate matters, Burgoyne received word on August 28th that a coordinated mission led by St. Leger down the Mohawk River Valley had retreated after failing to take Fort Stanwix. Meanwhile, General William Howe had redirected his forces from New York City to Philadelphia in a different campaign, leaving Burgoyne without the anticipated support. Following the defeat at Bennington, much of Burgoyne's Native American allies deserted him. Faced with a difficult situation and the necessity of finding a safe place to station his troops for the winter, Burgoyne had to make a choice: to retreat back to Fort Ticonderoga or push forward to Albany. He chose to advance. In a bold move, he cut off communications to the north to avoid having to defend a line of forts back to Ticonderoga. Burgoyne ordered Baron Riedesel to leave behind the outposts from Skensborough down south and made the strategic decision to cross the Hudson River. Between September 13th and 15th, his army made the crossing just north of Saratoga, a move that was meant to position them advantageously, despite the isolation from their northern bases. The Continental Army, having slowly retreated since early July after General Burgoyne captured Ticonderoga, found itself south of Stillwater, New York, under Major General Philip Schuyler's command. By August 19th, Major General Horatio Gates took over leadership from Schuyler, whose popularity had dipped due to Ticonderoga's fall and the subsequent retreat. Gates and Schuyler, who came from different backgrounds, had a history of disagreements, particularly about who should lead the Army's northern department. The Army started to grow as more militia joined up, sparked by calls from state governors, a victory at Bennington, and widespread anger over the murder of Jane McCree, a Loyalist's fiancée, by Native Americans under Burgoyne's orders. This influx of militia, unable to be matched by Burgoyne in terms of reinforcements, played a significant role in the outcome. By the battle's end, Burgoyne had 5,791 troops, while the Patriots boasted around 12,000. General George Washington's strategic maneuvers also boosted Gates's position. Washington focused primarily on General Howe's operations, but took significant risks in July to support the Northern Army. He sent his most dynamic officers, Major Generals Benedict Arnold and Benjamin Lincoln, northwards. Arnold was known for his aggressive leadership, and Lincoln had substantial influence over the New England militias. Additionally, Washington dispatched 750 men from Israel Putnam's division and the elite Provisional Rifle Corps, led by Colonel Daniel Morgan and comprising about 500 expert sharpshooters from Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. This group, later known as Morgan's Riflemen, significantly bolstered Gates's forces. On September 7th, Gates directed his army north to a strategically chosen spot known as Bemis Heights, just north of Stillwater and roughly 10 miles south of Saratoga. They spent about a week building defensive structures, guided by the designs of Polish engineer Tadeusz Kosciuszko. The chosen location offered a great defensive advantage, overseeing the only road to Albany and flanked by forested bluffs on the west, a terrain challenge for any approaching army. After crossing the Hudson River, British General Burgoyne proceeded southward with extra caution. This was due to the loss of his Native American allies, who had been providing vital intelligence about American positions. On September 18th, his troops reached an area just north of Saratoga, about 4 miles away from the American defensive lines. This move led to small skirmishes between American scouts and the forefront of Burgoyne's forces. Meanwhile, tensions were rising in the American camp after Arnold's return from Fort Stanwix. Although Arnold and Gates had a rocky but manageable relationship despite their strong personalities, Arnold's decision to include officers loyal to Schuyler in his staff aggravated the ongoing feud with Gates. This situation hadn't spiraled out of control by September 19th, but events that day would stir the pot further. Gates put Arnold in charge of the left side of the defenses and took command of the right side himself, which was technically under General Lincoln's command. Gates had sent Lincoln away in August to disrupt British movements behind Burgoyne's lines. Both Burgoyne and Arnold recognized the strategic value of capturing the heights on the American left. Once the morning fog cleared at 10 a.m., Burgoyne ordered his army to advance in 3 columns. Baron Riedzel led the left column with German troops and the 47th Foot along the river road, protecting the main artillery, supplies, and boats. The center column, headed by General James Inglis Hamilton, with the 9th, 20th, 21st, and 62nd Regiments, aimed to capture the heights. General Simon Fraser led the right wing, including the 24th Regiment and elite infantry forces, to outflank the American left through heavily wooded terrain. Anticipating a flanking maneuver by the British, Arnold asked Gates for permission to counter by moving his forces from the heights to potentially intercept British movements, utilizing their expertise in woodland fighting. Gates, who initially preferred to wait for a direct attack, hesitantly allowed a reconnaissance mission led by Daniel Morgan's troops and Henry Dearborn's light infantry. Morgan's forces encountered British advance troops in an open field owned by loyalist John Freeman, northwest of Bemis Heights. At this point, Fraser's column had been delayed and hadn't reached the field, while Hamilton's troops had managed to cross a ravine and were approaching from the east through challenging forested terrain. Riedzel's column was also delayed by obstacles placed by Americans. However, when gunfire was heard to the west, Riedzel directed some of his artillery toward the sound, indicating Morgan's men had engaged with Hamilton's advance company. Morgan strategically placed his sharpshooters, who successfully targeted nearly all the officers in the advancing British company. Surprisingly, Morgan and his crew charged forward, straight into the heart of Burgoyne's main army, pushing the advance company back. However, Fraser's troops arrived in time to flank Morgan's left, causing his men to retreat into the woods. James Wilkinson, spotting the situation, rode back to the American camp to call for reinforcements. In a chaotic moment, as the British regrouped, they accidentally fired upon their own, leading to friendly fire casualties. Around 1 o'clock post-meridium, the battle quieted down. Hamilton's troops positioned themselves on the north side, while American reinforcements arrived from the south. Learning Morgan was in a tight spot, Gates sent 2 New Hampshire regiments to aid him, with additional support from New York, Canadian, and Connecticut militia units commanded by Enoch Poor. Burgoyne organized his forces, preparing for the next phase of the battle. The fight saw periods of intense clashes and calmer intervals. Morgan's men, having regrouped in the woods, targeted officers and artillerymen effectively, at times capturing British artillery, only to lose it during countercharges. There was a moment when it was rumored that Burgoyne had been shot by a sniper, but it turned out to be one of his aides. The British line nearly collapsed, but was saved by General Phillips's timely support, allowing the 62nd to regroup. Roger Lamb, a British soldier, noted the high officer casualties, emphasizing the presence of many young, noble men in the army, drawn to military life after a long peace before the Revolution. As the battle neared its end, around 3 o'clock post-meridium, Riedzel took a critical decision to reinforce the front lines, leaving only a small guard on their baggage train. His troops' assault on the American right, combined with Fraser threatening the American left flank, forced Arnold to call for more troops. The ensuing darkness ended the conflict, with the Americans withdrawing to their defenses and the British holding the field. Despite winning, the British incurred nearly 600 casualties, heavily hitting Hamilton's center column, significantly reducing the 62nd Regiment, and losing many artillerymen. The Americans suffered nearly 300 casualties. Contrary to popular stories of General Arnold leading on the field, John Luzader, a former historian at the Saratoga National Historical Park, argues there's no contemporary evidence supporting this. Instead, Arnold remained at headquarters, managing through messengers. However, Arnold biographer James Kirby Martin contends Arnold had a more visible presence at Freeman's farm, potentially leading charges before Gates called him back. Burgoyne and his advisors decided to postpone any further moves until the 21st of September, planning to regroup closer to the American forces, while some troops were tasked with retrieving their fallen comrades. The planned attack on the 21st was abandoned after Burgoyne received a letter from Henry Clinton, who was in charge of the British forces in New York City, dated the 12th of September. In this letter, Clinton mentioned he might attempt to take Fort Montgomery in about 10 days. However, even if Clinton left New York on September 22nd, right after writing his letter, he wouldn't be able to reach Saratoga until the end of the month at the earliest. With his army running low on both manpower and supplies, Burgoyne found himself in a tight spot, but chose to wait, hoping Clinton would come to his aid. On September 23rd, Burgoyne reached out to Clinton, asking for any support or diversion to draw away Gates' forces. Clinton set off from New York on October 3rd, managing to capture Forts Montgomery and Clinton on October 6th, and his troops got as far north as Clermont, raiding the estate of the Livingston family on October 16th. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to the forces at Saratoga, General Lincoln and Colonel John Brown made a move against the British at Fort Ticonderoga, with Brown capturing some strategically weak positions in the area following a gathering of 2,000 men by Lincoln in Bennington early in September. These forces rejoined the American camp by September 29th after their assault. In the American camp, tensions between Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold reached a boiling point, erupting into outright conflict. Despite Arnold's significant role in the early successes, Gates failed to acknowledge Arnold's contributions in his reports to Congress and Governor George Clinton of New York. This oversight led to a fierce argument between Arnold and Gates, resulting in Gates stripping Arnold of his command, which was then passed to Benjamin Lincoln. Arnold, though officially transferred to Washington's command at his own request, chose to stay back in his tent instead of leaving. Despite popular stories, there's no actual proof that a petition from the officers convinced Arnold to remain. Throughout this time, skirmishes between the Army's scouts and sharpshooters were a daily occurrence, with Morgan's riflemen particularly effective against British patrols due to their knowledge of local warfare tactics. As time moved from September into October, it became evident that Clinton wouldn't be arriving to assist Burgoyne, who had to put his army on reduced rations starting October 3rd. The next day, despite exploring several strategies, Burgoyne's War Council couldn't reach a definitive decision until Burgoyne insisted on not retreating as it would be dishonorable. Eventually, they decided to launch an attack on the American left flank with more than a third of their remaining forces on October 7th. The American army they faced, now bolstered by Lincoln's forces, additional militiamen, and much-needed supplies and ammunition, had grown significantly stronger, numbering over 12,000 troops. Gates, aware of the dire straits Burgoyne's army was in through constant intelligence reports and intercepted communications, was well prepared for the assault. Despite having nominally more troops, General Burgoyne's forces were effectively reduced to about 5,000 battle-ready soldiers by October 7th. This decrease was due to the cumulative effects of earlier battle losses and desertions. Advised by General Riedesel to retreat, Burgoyne instead chose to scope out the American left flank for a possible attack. Accompanied by Fraser's advanced corps, which included light troops, the 24th Foot on the right, British Grenadiers on the left, and a central force from all German regiments in the army, they also had 8 British cannons led by Major Williams and 2 from Hesse-Hanau under Captain Pausch. Setting out between 10 and 11 a.m., they advanced to a wheat field on a rise above Millbrook to assess the American position. However, the field's proximity to the surrounding woods posed risks for their flanks. On the American side, command adjustments saw Gates taking charge of the left flank and assigning the right to General Lincoln after Arnold was removed from field command. When informed of Burgoyne's movements, Gates deployed over 8,000 troops, including Morgan's riflemen on the far left, and a central line composed of regiments from New York, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Canada, along with militia companies. An additional 1,200 New York militia were kept in reserve. The battle initiated around 2 to 2:30 p.m. with British Grenadiers opening fire, which proved largely ineffective due to terrain and the Americans' initial restraint. The scene turned chaotic when American forces responded fiercely to a British bayonet charge, injuring Major Ackland and causing significant British casualties. Similarly, on the American left, Morgan's troops effectively countered British forces, including Fraser's regulars. While General Fraser was critically injured, reports of his being targeted by Timothy Murphy, one of Morgan's riflemen, are likely embellished tales from later years. Fraser's injury, alongside the substantial support from Ten Brock's militia, compelled the British into a retreat. This battle segment, lasting around an hour, was devastating for Burgoyne, who lost nearly 400 men, including most of the Grenadier Command and a significant portion of their artillery. In an unexpected twist during the battle, General Arnold, visibly upset and possibly under the influence, rushed to join the fray despite initial indications he wasn't supposed to. However, a letter from someone who witnessed the entire event hints that Arnold might have actually received approval from Gates, his superior, to enter the action. When Arnold took off, Gates had Major Armstrong try to retrieve him, but Armstrong only managed to reach Arnold after the battle had largely ended. the British had set up their defences with two main strongholds. The more remote one was manned by approximately 300 soldiers, led by the Hessian commander Heinrich von Breymann, and the other was under Lord Balcarres's command. Positioned between these two strongholds was a small group of Canadians. When the battle intensified, most of the retreating British forces sought refuge with Balcarres, since Breymann's position was a bit out of the way. Arnold was at the forefront of the pursuing Americans and directed an assault on Balcarres's stronghold. Despite Balcarres's solid defences, his redoubt withstood the attack, prompting John Burgoyne, a British leader, to later admit the Americans' unwavering determination was unmatched in his experience. Arnold, seeing the attack on Balcarres's position was going nowhere, and noticing an opportunity to hit Breymann's redoubt, dashed across the battlefield, miraculously avoiding injury, to lead a charge on Breymann's weaker rear defences. This move was coordinated with Morgan's troops attacking from the opposite side, resulting in fierce combat that ultimately led to Breymann's death and the redoubt's capture. Arnold was not so fortunate in the chaos, as his horse was shot from under him, breaking his leg in the process. Armstrong finally caught up with him, officially ordering him back, but Arnold was already incapacitated and had to be carried back on a stretcher, lamenting that he wished he had died as a hero in that moment. The fall of Breymann's redoubt left the British vulnerable, but as night fell, their situation worsened. A group of German soldiers attempted to reclaim the redoubt, but ended up captured after being misled by a guide directly into American hands as darkness enveloped the battlefield. Burgoyne faced a tough situation after losing over 1,000 men in 2 battles, leaving his forces significantly outnumbered by the Americans, about 3-1. The Americans had about 330 casualties, both killed and injured. Burgoyne also lost several key leaders, failed in his attempts to take the American position, and saw his front line breached. Following the second battle, he tactically retreated under the darkness, pulling back 10 to 15 miles north to an area near what we now know as Schuylerville, New York. By the morning of October 8th, he had regrouped in the fortified positions he occupied since September 16th. Come October 13th, with his army now encircled, Burgoyne called a meeting to discuss surrender options. One proposal from Riedesel was for the troops to be paroled and allowed to return to Canada unarmed. However, Burgoyne believed that the American General Gates would reject such terms, instead suggesting they be sent to Boston to then sail back to Europe. After days of back and forth, an agreement was reached. On October 17th, Burgoyne officially surrendered his army to Gates. The British and German troops, in a show of respect, were given the traditional honours of war during their surrender. They became known as the Convention Army, named after the agreement that was supposed to send them back to Europe. But plans changed when the Continental Congress decided to revoke the convention, leading to the Convention Army remaining in captivity for the rest of the war. The failed campaign led by General Burgoyne turned out to be a pivotal moment in the war. After this setback, General Burgoyne headed back to England, and from then on, he wasn't entrusted with any commanding roles in the British Army. This experience left the British with a newfound respect for the American forces. They were taken aback by the Americans' fierce determination and bravery in battle. One British officer was quoted as saying, "The courage and obstinacy with which the Americans fought were the astonishment of everyone, and we now became fully convinced that they are not that contemptible enemy we had hitherto imagined them, incapable of standing a regular engagement, and that they would only fight behind strong and powerful works." General Arnold, who played a significant role in the battles at Saratoga, saw a reversal in his fortunes. Earlier passed over for promotion in 1777, his seniority was reinstated as a recognition of his efforts. Yet Arnold's celebration was short-lived due to a leg wound that confined him to bed for 5 months. While recovering and unable to return to field duty, Arnold, then serving as the military governor of Philadelphia, began treasonous communications with the British. His plans to surrender the fort at West Point were foiled, leading him to defect to the British after his accomplice, John Andre, was captured, exposing their plot. Arnold later joined forces with William Phillips, a British commander, for a campaign in Virginia in 1781. General Gates, despite his limited active role in the battle, earned accolades for leading the Americans to what was then their most notable victory of the war. There were rumors that he might have been involved in a plot to replace George Washington as commander-in-chief. Instead, Gates was put in charge of the main American army in the South. His leadership there led to a crushing defeat at the 1780 Battle of Camden, following which Gates never again led troops in the field. In a gesture of gratitude and celebration over Burgoyne's surrender, Congress declared December 18, 1777, as a national day of solemn thanksgiving and praise. This marked the country's first official recognition of a holiday by that name. When word got out that Burgoyne had surrendered, King Louis XVI of France saw it as a green light to start talks with the Americans. This led to them officially teaming up and France joining the war, which really took the fight to a whole new level. Because of this, Britain had to spread its resources thin, not just in North America, but also towards battles in the West Indies and Europe. They were banking on the support from the Loyalists in North America, but that did not quite pan out as they had hoped. Remember, France had lost to the British in the French and Indian War more than 10 years before this. So, when they got a chance to back the Americans during the Revolutionary War, it was more than just help. It was about getting back at the British. France kept its distance at first, not fully committing its support until the Americans showed they could actually win, which became clear after the victories in the Battles of Saratoga. After that, France was all in, sending over soldiers, donations, loans, military equipment, and supplies to help the American cause. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.